There are some things about Dragon Ball that you often just have to accept, even if they don't make complete sense. The Dragon Balls were active again after 8 months. Gohan was both 9 and 11 during the Cell Games. And a random mad scientist in a cave created androids stronger than the Emperor of the Universe. Wait, what? The androids being stronger than Freeza is one of those things that people still have an issue with. And it makes sense. On a surface level, it's absurd. Freeza could destroy planets and had the strongest beings in the universe under his control. But a bunch of mere human beings and robots could potentially be stronger than both him and Super Saiyans? Goku had faced robots back in the Red Ribbon Army, and they weren't even close to that kind of power. But would you believe me if I said there was supposed to be a reason as to how they were so strong? A reason other than just because the plot demanded it to? Because there actually is one, and it's one that helps explain the entire arc. So, how were the androids stronger than Freeza? To start off, let's think about this more generally. What makes an antagonist logically more powerful and threatening than the previous one? What makes us buy that the new threat is a threat? I think there's 2 ways the story ends up going about this. Either the antagonist is from an aspect of the world that we haven't explored in the story, or they are revealed to have similar abilities to what the hero has at that point in time. Most of the villains in Dragon Ball use one or both of these ideas to sell the idea that the new villains are threats. First, Goku explores the world and faces comedic one-off villains attempting to take the Dragon Balls. Then he enters a martial arts tournament and faces enemies like him, also trained in martial arts. Then he faces an entire organization of villains, where higher-ranked members also know how to fight, as well as a professional assassin. Then he faces the Crane School, rival martial artists who have been trained in a similar way to him. Then he faces demons and creatures that aren't human beings. And once he surpasses all beings on Earth, he faces beings not from Earth. He fights aliens. And with Freeza, he fights the aliens that command the other aliens, with enough power to destroy planets. The big question is, how do you go beyond Freeza? What possible avenue in the universe of Dragon Ball would be unexplored when Goku already defeated the proclaimed strongest being in the universe? There doesn't seem to be a logical connection between something stronger than Freeza and robots and cyborgs. But there's one small comment by Akira Toriyama in Daizenshu 2 that gives the answer. Time. The main characters have become the strongest in even the universe, so next they had to surpass time. And from that piece of information, everything falls into place. The element of time was something new, something the series hadn't done before. In the same way that we'd never seen aliens until before the Saiyans arrived, we'd never seen elements of time travel before the androids. Freeza may have been the strongest in the universe. Freeza may have been able to destroy planets. But Freeza had no control over time. If an obstacle is related to time, that's something that automatically makes them more than Freeza. It's something that Freeza could never be. And the one thing that makes the androids different is their relationship to time. Trunks travels through time from the future to warn the main characters that these androids are predestined to kill them. How are they so strong? Trunks doesn't tell us the specifics, but the point is that's not important. We know they're strong because they've already killed the protagonist in the future, and that's all the justification we need. When the heroes train and fight the androids, they're not just fighting some artificial humans that are probably powerful from their technology. They're fighting destiny itself. That is something that the series had never done before, and that's why it was the next step up for the series to go. This idea is much more consistently part of the narrative than you'd expect. The threat of the future, of the heroes being killed by the androids just like Trunks had warned them, constantly hangs over their heads in the early part of that arc. Up until they get spared by 17 and 18, there's no indication that history isn't eventually going to progress in a similar way to how it did in Trunks' timeline. Vegeta beats Android 19 easily, making you think that the future has changed, but when Trunks arrives back in the past, he says 19 and 20 aren't the androids that killed them. They still exist, and 20 says he's going to activate them. Small details might have changed, but if 17 and 18 awakened, history could progress in the exact same way. But 17 and 18, once awakened, don't kill them. History changes, and they don't end up as the final villains. The question is, why? The answer to that has something to do with Kazuhiko Torishima. Torishima, Akira Toriyama's former editor, has said in interviews that he called up Toriyama while the arc was ongoing and said he didn't think 19 and 20, and later 17 and 18, were good villains at all. So he convinced Toriyama to come up with new villains. While Torishima cites their unthreatening designs as the reason for not liking them, perhaps another reason why he thought they were unsuitable as villains was this idea that they didn't feel like a natural progression from Freeza. That the idea that the only reason they're strong is because we know they destroy the future was hard to swallow as an explanation. It was almost a cop-out. That the theme of time didn't work as a suitable follow-up to Freeza. So 17 and 18 were scrapped as final villains, and Toriyama came up with Cell, who not only looked more menacing, but also had an actual physical justification as to why he was so strong. He was stronger than Freeza because, well, he was made of Frieza's DNA, and of Frieza's father, and of all of the main characters mixed together into one being. From there, it's a logical conclusion to believe that he would be more powerful than simply Freeza himself, without having to go into metaphysical ideas about destiny and time travel. But the interesting thing is, despite this, Toriyama didn't seem to be willing to scrap the idea of the time theme altogether, because Cell too has a connection to time. He's from the future. It becomes such an arbitrary detail by the end, but Cell being from the future is actually the first thing we ever find out about him. Before we even meet him or know what he's up to, we see the time machine he traveled in and destroyed. Before we even know what he is, we know he's a threat from another timeline altogether. By having Cell be from the future, it means that the characters aren't just fighting some chimera monster, they're fighting a being from a different time to them. One that didn't have to follow their rules. One who wouldn't even exist in the present world if it weren't for the ability to travel through time. And the only reason he could get so strong in his perfect form was because he could go back in time and absorb the androids who were dead in his own timeline. And surprisingly, the theme of time continues even after Cell is introduced. Because the series then says, if the heroes are facing a threat that comes from time itself, how can they combat it? The answer? By mastering time themselves. With the room of spirit and time, the hyperbolic time chamber, by having a place that can squeeze time to their own limits, and using that to its fullest extent by training there, and through that, becoming strong enough to combat Cell. Yes, a cheap and convenient plot device can actually fit within the themes of this arc. Cell uses time to his advantage, and so do the heroes. But the heroes manage to use time better, and that's how they win. They win the struggle of time, and they defeat Cell. I think this idea is partially the reason as to why the arc ends with Future Trunks destroying the androids and Cell in his own timeline. Before, he could never get strong enough to defeat the androids, but through the events of the Cell arc, through his mastery of time, he's able to defeat that insurmountable obstacle he could never conquer, no matter how hard he trained. Because time is literally another dimension. So by conquering it, Trunks' power is, figuratively, in a complete other dimension to everything he had ever faced. So, at the end of the day, how were the androids stronger than Freeza? It still is because the plot demanded they be, but I think there was supposed to be something more than that. The execution may not have been amazing. In fact, it's often so subtle it's hard to notice it. But the author himself has stated that was an intention of the arc. It doesn't necessarily make the arc better. Poor writing is still poor writing, no matter what the author's intentions were. But I do think it's an important part of the story that shouldn't be overlooked. If you're going to criticize something, at least try to criticize it for the things it was actually intending to do. So, I hope you got something out of this, and thanks for watching.